Thanks for coming. So, what do we do as software developers? We write code, right? We read code, we understand code, sometimes. We design systems, design architecture. We generally solve problems. But then, throughout all those activities, we talk. We talk a lot. We talk to our fellow developers about the code we have written, we have read. We talk to the business about the problems we have solved. Yet, we rarely ever stop to think about all this talking. So, that's more or less why I wanted to make this talk. Originally, I wanted to share with you a bunch of tips and tricks for effective communication, but then I realized that I might be trying to squeeze a little bit too much for 40 minutes. So instead, my goal here is to make you a little bit more aware of all the communication that happens around you as developers. And then I wanted to introduce myself, but then I realized that it doesn't really matter. It's not important. What is important in context of this presentation is that I read a lot, and some of those books turned out to be about psychology in general and communication in particular. What is also important is that I talk a lot, and what's even worse, I don't exactly know when to shut up. So if I'm to point a couple of failures of mine through last few years, probably all of them are related to communication. They were not technical. I didn't break the production environment, but I screwed up a good couple of times on communication. So I decided, okay, let's step up a game a little bit. I like to think about myself as an average communicator, but at the same time, I think I'm a decently communicating developer, because so yeah, that's about me. And now we can go to defining what the communication actually is. Some of you might be aware of the Shannon communication model. It comes from information theory. It's pretty technical. You have a message gets encoded, goes through a channel, gets decoded, and then received. Okay? But now let's translate it to something more relevant to human communication. So then you have some sort of intent. You have some idea, some thought, something you want to communicate, something in your brain. Then you put words around it, transfer it, be it you spoke it or you write it, then someone else reads it or hears it, and they form an understanding in their brain of what you wanted to communicate. Okay? Now, the goal of communication is to bring these two opposite sides as close to each other as possible. So we want the understanding in the other person's brain to be as close to what you wanted to communicate in your brain. And this turns out to be a very, very hard thing. But enough theory, let's talk about real examples. Estimates. Raise your hands if you had to estimate something throughout your career, like someone asked you to do that. Okay, so almost the full room, which is exactly what I expected. And the process sometimes looks like this. Okay, so someone comes, be it a PM, and they ask when it will be done. And someone answers in a week. Perfect. But then the week passes by and it's not done. What happened? And one of the scenarios is that the one person, what they understood is, in a week, we will have it running in production for 100% of users, and the other person, the developer, meant, okay, if I drop the thing I'm doing right now, and I try hard, then maybe in a week from now, I will have a pull request open, maybe. And if we're lucky, it will be running in stage, maybe. Okay, so that's communication issue here. So So the goal of estimates is to provide a number that has the same meaning for both sides, right? So how do we do that? To do that, we first need to understand why we are being asked for that number. And there might be plenty of reasons. There might be a promise made to someone, to users, to regulators. There might be a market opportunity to catch. There might be someone might be doing internal planning, or not even planning, but just prioritizing the tasks. There's plenty of reasons. More often than not, there is no good reason. Someone just thought that it's a good idea to ask for an estimate. Regardless, that brings us to the first very important point of effective communication. To communicate in that case, you need to understand what the other side needs, what the other side wants, what's their context, why are they asking. So now imagine that you know that, and you want to, there was a promise, let's say, or you want to, there is a planning going on, whatever, like you want to estimate a release date. So how to communicate that estimate in a way that will leave no room for interpretation? We split it in chunks. We say what is in scope of delivery. We say what is our estimate in terms of developer days, like the work amount that is there. How you get to that number, it's out of scope, like let's hope you can. Then you explicitly declare the uncertainty factor. So how confident are you about that estimate? Okay. Then you communicate explicitly how many developers will be assigned to that work and what is the assumed availability of those developers. You will see in a second that this might be quite tricky. And then at the end, you communicate what will be delivered, to what environment, and by what date. So here is an example. So we say that, okay, we have a work item. This work item is worth 55 man-days of work. We are pretty confident about it. It's just 1.2 multiplier. We have 4 work days a week because calls, because operation stuff, because whatever, incidents. And then we have 1 developer. We multiply all together, and then we see that, okay, it might be in 4 months from now. Okay, now if you look at the numbers, if you just said, okay, 55 days from now, 2 months, right? 2 months and 4 months are not the same thing. That's the first thing here. And you also communicate explicitly that it will be in stage for testing. So if you do this like that, you have much more room for discussion about that estimate. If someone comes and asks you, okay, why it's 4 months, then you can say, okay, are you questioning are you questioning the 55 or are you questioning all of the rest? Because that's a different discussion, right? Like we can talk separately about each of those points. Tell me which you think is too much. But if you think all of them is right, then that's the right estimate. Okay, I think that covers the topic of estimates pretty well, but there is one more thing here, and it's about wording. And something I strongly encourage you to do is to strongly differentiate between estimates and commitments. They are not the same things. Commitments typically happen on top, based on the estimate, but estimate is just a prediction, it's theoretical. Okay? And commitment is a promise. I tell you, I commit that this will be delivered. I will do whatever I can to make it happen. But if you ask me for an estimate, I will give you a number, and it will be a best effort, my informed guess, but it's just a prediction. And this brings us to another point, the general point about communication, that words matter. Not all of the words, most of the words doesn't matter, but some of them do. And here you had an example where they do. Okay, we estimated, now we move to the implementation. Now the first thing that happens during implementation is discussion with the business. And when you discuss with the business, there's one golden rule. You don't speak technicalities. Those people generally speaking, don't care about pull requests, they don't care about commits, they don't care about branches. They sometimes care about tests, but typically not. So you generally don't use those words if you talk to business. And this brings us to another generic point, is that you always have to adjust what you say to your audience. You're already doing that, because if you have the same thing, you will tell it differently to your parents, to your spouse, to a random person on the street, and to your coworker. So we do this naturally, just sometimes we need to do this explicitly. Okay, we progress with the implementation. We want to write some comments. And surprise, surprise, comments is a communication concern because a code comment is a message to someone reading the code in the future. And how to make that message effective? You have to predict, imagine what will be useful in few months, years from now when someone will be reading that code. And you might reach the conclusion that confirms this why not what saying. Like the comment should be about why something happens, because like code is pretty good in describing what it does, but it doesn't describe why it does what it does. And that's what we have comments for. So when you send that message to the future, it's worth saying why it was done like that. And a small side note here, I don't know if you had that experience, but I often reached a genuinely funny comment in a code base in the session of like 3 hours long debugging, and it made my day better. So I really like jokes in comments, so do that, please do that. It makes everyone's lives better. If someone tells you there is no place for humor in code, they're wrong. Okay, error messages. Another message into the future. And here you have a good example why you can have good or bad error messages. Like you can say that operation is unsupported, or you can say that can't update address of an inactive user. How do you think? Which one will make more sense for a receiver of that message? Like gives them more context, more information, and makes it easier to act on that, right? Like I assume it's the second. Okay, the next thing, breadcrumbs. More often than not, you will find yourself investigating why the given thing was implemented a particular way. And if you do that investigation, it's good to, it's useful to have some help from yourself today. So what it means is that you can try to leave links to Jira issues, GitHub issues, Stack Overflow questions, Slack conversations, basically everywhere. Put it everywhere that you can think of, because you never know where you will start the investigation and who will go with what path to figure out what was going on. So put links, like put Jira tags, Jira keys in pull request titles, put Slack links in code comments, put Slack links in Jira issues. Like everything can be linked together, and this will only help you. Okay, the next thing, building in the open. And this is a tough one, but generally speaking, you will never know who is interested in your work. You can assume, but you will never know. And I'm speaking in the context of organization, engineering organization. What is possible is that you do something, but then someone is already working on that. So if you build in the open, meaning you communicate on the open channels, then someone can see your message and come to you, hey, I'm working on the same thing, let's talk. Or what's equally possible, someone will come to you and say, hey, I built that thing 2 months ago, maybe you want to get inspired, maybe you want to use it. Or maybe someone will come to you and say, but no, we don't do it that way here. Like, stop. And they will save you weeks or months of effort. Like, whatever you do, try to do this in the open. And I know this relies a lot on the company's culture, but if you have any way to affect that culture, it's a way that can benefit you a lot. Another connected thing is you need to keep people in the loop. That's something I often repeat to myself and others, is that if I am irreplaceable, this means I failed at my job. My job is not to solve problems, my job is to solve problems in a way that is sustainable. If I'm the only person that knows how the system works, I failed, okay? Because it's not sustainable. Another thing, you finish the implementation. Now you have to release it. And if you're lucky, release means deployment. If you're not lucky, this might mean a much more complicated procedure that involves multiple parties like mobile developers, backend developers, marketing, operations, legal, compliance, treasury, whatever. And once again, if you're lucky, there will be someone else doing that job, which is great. But if you're in a startup or some particular organization, it might be a developer that coordinates the release after it's being done. And that's something that can be hard if you don't approach it the right way. Luckily, the right way is not that hard. Like, just put a Slack thread, bunch of emojis and bullet points, and you're done. Like, that's not hard. Okay, just leverage the tools that you have. Okay, let's move forward, or to be honest, backward. So let's a few steps back. We are back at the pull request stage. And now we look at it from the author perspective. You're the pull request author. Your goal is to get your pull request reviewed. How do we make that happen? The first thing is you need to find reviewers. And now the key thing is you need to find as many people as needed, but not more. Because diffusion of responsibility and the bystander effect means that the more people you ask for review, the bigger the chance that they will just think someone else will do that. Okay? So if you need 1 approval, find 2 or 3 reviewers. If you need 2 approvals, find 3 or 4 reviewers. Like, have some backup, but don't bring the whole team, like, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 people, because no one will take a look. Another thing is put a deadline, like, not a hard one, but communicate explicitly when you want to merge your PR. What are your plans? Like, I implemented this, now I will test it manually maybe, or I just need to polish it a little bit. I plan to merge it in 2 days from now. Communicate that, and so the reviewers know, they can adjust their schedule, and they can tell you, okay, I won't have time by that date. You have either to prolong the period or find someone else. And that's fine. You just open doors for that discussion. So here is an example, like, hey, anyone up for a review? Versus, Paolo, Ezekiel, can you look into this PR for improved tracing in Fiat service? I'd like to merge it by Thursday morning. I can guarantee you that this one will be most effective statistically. Okay, another point, make it reviewer friendly. And what does it mean? It means most of the time that it has to be small. Luckily, or like accidentally, I continuously fail to make small pull requests. Like, I just cannot do it. Whenever I try, I end up with tens of files modified and thousands of lines being changed. If you can do this, great. If you're like me, then I have a couple of tricks to help. First, description. Like, describe what the pull request is about, because if it's not small, then it's hard to infer why you might be doing something in particular way. Then put the comments yourself on the pieces, on the lines that you think are important. So if you have thousands of lines and just 3 of them are important, then mark those lines explicitly so the reviewers can acknowledge them explicitly and find them. And then list remaining to-dos. So like, if you still have to refactor something, or you still have to write tests, or you still have to, I don't know, test it manually, write it down so the reviewers know what is there to expect. Okay, another topic, a hot one, rebase versus merge. And you might be wondering, how is that a communication concern? That's why. When you do a rebase and force push, this is what reviewer sees. Exactly same commit message applied 3 times, and they have no clue what changed. Okay? So please don't force push ever if pull request is open, because you mess up the communication with reviewers. If you want the Git history to be clean, just do it after it's reviewed or whatever. Like, just make sensible commits. Okay, now the other side of the picture. Now you are a reviewer. And the goal is we want to give a good review, meaning we probably want to assure some standards. At the same time, we don't want to make enemies. The first tip, level of give a fuck. Not all of the comments are equally important. This has no standard, but that's a practice you can embrace, like just say how much you care about a particular comment. Okay, another thing in the same spirit, there is something called conventional comments. You can check the page. And it gives a bit of guidance, like it gives prefixes for code comments with a clearly defined semantics that you can use, and this makes review easier. Yeah, and another advice, don't be a jerk. Okay, that's not, it's hard, I know, but just try. Okay, and what does it mean? First, like if you find a problem, try to suggest a solution. If you cannot think of a solution, that's fine. Like you will not always have solutions, but then say it explicitly, I tried, I failed, but it's still a problem. But at least try, it's a good practice. Another thing, offer the help. If you see that someone is struggling, offer them pair programming or some call, describe what you really mean. Like just try to help the pull request author as much as possible. Then connected point is show empathy. So imagine that someone spent like 6 weeks doing something, opened a PR, and now he has a continuous stream of comments. And okay, I agree, they should not have worked in isolation for 6 weeks. Okay, we all agree that should not have happened, but sometimes it happens. And now that person might be a little bit frustrated because they want to be done with it. And you have to like understand that. It means that like if there are critical points, they have to be addressed, but maybe some are not critical and it's not a good time to have that conversation. And this brings us to another point, the same thing, but more general, pick your battles. So you have some social capital. You have friends, you have some relationships, and now whenever you miscommunicate or have a conflict, it might decrease that social capital. So pick your battles. Like not everything is super important. What is important is that sometimes people need to fail. They have to have opportunity to fail. So if you know that this is broken, this will blow up for sure in some time, then just make sure that you have a way to mitigate that it will not affect the whole business, and then let it go. Let it merge and let the people who did it see that it blew up, okay? Just make sure they will fall on a cushion and nothing wrong is going to happen. Okay, so we are done with pull requests. Now a few topics about everyday communication. Hello. Yeah, that's what people do. Okay, don't do this. Like if you communicate asynchronously, don't send a single hello. Don't, please. If you need justification, go to that page or alternatives. There is a bunch on the internet, and just write immediately what you want after the greeting. Like, don't send me a pure greeting in an async environment. Okay. Another thing, repeat, 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 because people will forget, people will not read, people will misinterpret. Generally, you have to be prepared to repeat, repeat, and repeat the stuff you say. That's totally normal. The only thing you can do is that if you find yourself repeating something like 4th time, you can try to think, okay, maybe I can improve something on my side with how I explain things. Generally speaking, that's normal. Okay, now let's talk a little bit of how to get a response. You have a question, you want to get a response in organization. And there are 3 points here. Target your messages, explain why you need something, and then explain when you need it. We already talked about it around pull request, but this applies to basically any question. The first point is target your messages. So you want to ping the person that might have an answer. If you don't know for sure, then go with the best guess, and maybe they will know someone else who actually have the answer. It increases the likelihood of getting the thing you need. Okay? Then explain why you need something. There is a rather well-repeated study called Xerox study by Ellen Langener, if you need, but long story short, even the simplest explanation of why you need something increases your chances of getting that significantly. So just if you ask for something, explain why you need it, and then explain when you need it, so that the person that is to provide it to you can comment on that. They will either try to make it in time, or they will tell they cannot make it in time. Once again, you open space for discussion. So here, once again, you have an example. Hey, where can I find CPU usage metrics? Versus, hey, I need to get CPU usage metrics of our servers. Not sure who can help with this. Maybe Tiago? We are releasing a CPU-heavy feature on Wednesday, and I need to prepare the setup. I can guarantee you that the second message will have... what did I click? No, sorry. That the second message will have much higher rate of success. Okay. Now, from the other side, give the responses you want to get. And what does it mean? If you don't know the answer to the question, but you know who might, step up and bring that person to the thread, like bring this to their attention. If you don't have time to do something, say this. It's fine. Like, we are all busy people. But if you ignore a message, this gives no feedback for the person asking, and they cannot react. So if you don't have time, just say, and that's fine. Then if you will have time, but tomorrow morning or in the afternoon or in a week from now, also say this. Then the person asking can make a decision. Okay, can I wait, or should I look for someone else? It's a simple thing. And then if you have time right now and you started looking into a thing, but you realize it will take some time, also respond immediately. Give the feedback so the person asking will know that you started looking. Okay, forward. I know it's a pain, but humans are biologically inclined towards smiles. We like smiles. We like smiling people. It triggers the right biochemistry in our brains. So we have to smile. I know it's hard, especially for developers, right? But try to do that. It will make everyone's life easier. Just don't overdo it. I personally believe that over-enthusiasm is worse than grumpiness. Like, if everything is super great, awesome, yay, then nothing is. And then the other side. Not every message has to be polite, or like, it has to be civil, but we shouldn't smile all the time. Like, some messages have to be harsh. You just need to be very careful about that and think what consequences it might have and what level of harshness is harsh enough and not harsh too much. But yeah, it's important as well. Okay, something lighter, the formatting. Like, you have to acknowledge, once again, one thing, that people will not read what you write. Okay, they won't. If you write something, you intend that to be read by 5 people, maybe 3 will read it. Okay, people generally don't read stuff. And how to make them read it is to make it easy to scan. So what does it mean? Like, put TLDR on top of your message. So if you're writing like 3 paragraphs of text, then put TLDR on top so the audience know what this will be about and they can decide if they want to proceed or not. If they just see a wall of text, they will just ignore it. Bolden the important parts. So if someone decides, okay, this is important, but I don't want to read those 3 paragraphs, they will just scan the text and then read only the things boldened. And use bullet points, because then you can read first word of each sentence and then see if they are relevant. And at the end, don't overdo it, but then your message looks like a clown and it's not good for anyone. Okay, another thing. Quick calls. Yes, meetings are costly, inconvenient, annoying, but sadly they are effective. Or at least they can be if we can make them so. So how to make a meeting effective is a topic for a book. There are books actually about that. But generally speaking, synchronous communication is not ultimate evil, even though some of the people think as such. So my personal heuristic is that if I see like more than 10 messages sent over an hour, it's probably a waste of everyone's time. We should have a short call and discuss it. It's inconvenient, painful, but in terms of like time efficiency, it might be better. Okay, now I told you a few times to target your messages. This means like mention someone explicitly, and it creates noise on their side, so try to use it as little as possible, just to be gentle. And there's one important thing. If you have a long thread, like 50 messages, and then you realized that, okay, I need this other guy from that other team to help us here, and you bring them in, like you mentioned them, don't expect that they will read through the whole thread, okay? Don't be a jerk. Try to summarize the context, what's happening, so they can help them help you. Like, be cautious of everyone's time. Okay, so now we still have quite some time. So let's yeah, sure.
Why do you think that the shorthand is not always better than writing messages?
Why do I think that short call is better than?
Always better than messages.
Not always better than messages. Because for a call, you make an interruption. Like you need to bring all those peoples together, so they have to be. Maybe a small disclaimer. I'm speaking from a perspective of a async organization, like either distributed or fully remote, like the organization where people work from their homes or they're not at the computer all the time. And then if you make a call, you force them to come to the computer at that point, leave whatever they are doing, or even like stop writing code, stop designing something, like just come and have a call. You're affecting their schedule, how they work. So you want to avoid that. At the same time, if you're wasting time with those long threads because it just takes too much time, it's maybe a good trade-off to do that. So it's always a matter of trade-offs. Okay, now a few things about more general principles. The first principle is understanding the other side. This is something something that we have started with. Always try to know why a question is being asked. Why is someone asking for it? Then don't take the message at the face value, but sometimes do. What does it mean? Like, if someone asks you, can we do it in 2 weeks? It has 2 interpretations. They can be trying to be polite and say, please try to do it in 2 weeks. Or they might be purely theoretically interested if it's doable in 2 weeks. Right? And those two cases need a different response, different handling. So you need to understand which one is that. Okay, another one. Ensure that the message was understood. So it's our job to be understood. And then it's not enough to just send a message. Okay? You have to verify that the other party actually got your message, they understood it, and if they understood it the way you wanted it to be understood. Okay? If you want this phrased more technically, don't be UDP. The next point, adjust content to the audience. This is very closely connected to the first thing, but I believe it's important enough to be a separate one. So whenever you speak in a way that makes sense for your audience. Like as an example, don't talk about commits to the business, for example. Next, once again, don't be a jerk. Okay? It's hard, but yes, as sad as it is, all those things like formalities, conventions, smiles, they matter. We as a society came with all those things through the years. Now they exist, and many people, especially outside of software development, take them for granted. So sadly, we have to accommodate them and follow those practices. So we greet each other, we smile to each other, we use proper ways to address them. Yeah, sadly, that's how society works. Okay, now a few words about language proficiency. Language proficiency matters less than you think, especially in the current environment. Most often you will work with people from multiple countries, most of which will not be native speakers in English. And this means that everyone is more or less fine if you make grammatical mistakes, if you don't know some words, or if you use something incorrectly, as long as it doesn't cause issues in understanding you. So if you're understood, if no one communicates that they cannot understand you, then it's fine. But if you focus on language proficiency too much, it can actually backfire because you won't be understood anymore. If you use too fancy wording in a team that is okay, they know the business language, but they don't know, like they are not native speakers, then you will stop being understood. Okay, now about brevity. Generally speaking, the longer the message is, the lower the chance it will be read in full. So brevity matters. Like, try to make your messages as concise as possible if you want them to be read in full. And where it matters the most is documentation. My personal take is that no one reads documentation. If you want your documentation to be read, it has to be short. Okay, there are a lot of other ways to make documentation good and readable and actually worth something. There are some good presentations about that. But brevity and conciseness is one of the key things here. Okay, communication in the open, also something we already talked about, but try to think about it like that. It's easy to ignore the message. It's impossible to figure out what's happening in someone else's head. Okay? So just from that rule, you can infer that it's better to communicate in the open and not. And this means that direct messages should be an exception and not the norm. The thing is that this is hard. This creates noise, okay, because you have a lot of channels, a lot of messages, because everyone writes about everything they do. You need a proper setup that accommodates that practices. And even if you have that, people will still have a natural tendency to communicate privately. And that's fine. That's natural. You just have to fight it because the benefits are worth it. Like in a grand scheme of things, it's really beneficial to have all the communication happening in the open. So if you can, try to avoid private messages for work-related stuff. Okay, another thing, effective communication globally, all the rules, all the tips and tricks I shared, they require effort and so are costly. And it's not always worth it. So it doesn't mean that you have to right now stop and every pull request apply the conventional comments. Like if you can, then great, but bear in mind, not every conversation needs that tricks and tips. Like you just need to figure out which of them have a potential to being misunderstood, and then tailor your communication style and the patterns you use for that topic, for that conversation. And then at the end, go, if you think you know enough, you have all the knowledge, all the tips and tricks, now go and read that book. And then you realize you know nothing because communication is very much culture specific. The patterns that works in Europe won't work in Asia or US. Some of them will, but some of them won't. And that book is wholly about that. It's not about communication, but it's about cultural differences. Okay, and here you have even more resources. I prepared some of the books, videos, links that can be used to dive more into the topic of communication. I even ordered them for you by importance, so just start from the top and go from there. And if you can find all the slides here, and now I just want to leave you with that thought that communication is everywhere. Like it's all around us, you do it all the time, so just be mindful and maybe sometimes stop and think if you do it efficiently. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? If we do, then
I have an honest but trick question. What about emojis? Because I've had to explain to 50-year-old man that sending me an eggplant I don't care if you love eggplants, it's not gonna work at work. And I've had debates with people saying, oh, when I get a thumbs up or a smiley face, I know you hate me. So yeah, I know. Do you have any advice on this, or have you dealt with frictions in the past?
yes, I know this is something that is worth discussing. Unfortunately, there's no golden rule here. Like my experience is that most of the environments are fine with emojis. Like most of the environments are better with emojis. Like especially in the remote environments, like it's really hard to convey emotions in text. And emojis are a way to do that. So you cannot smile through chat if you don't use emojis. But we need smiles. This gives additional information to interpret the message. So from that perspective, the emojis are worth it, but some people just can't handle them well, or like don't like them, and then it requires a dedicated conversation about that. That's my take. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So I have first two questions about this talk. I'm just curious why during the session you didn't invite us to ask questions. And it is also for me interesting that no one asked questions. Yeah, so it is a communication topic.
Yes, I can answer that. That's because I forgot. I forgot to say
no
that that I prefer questions at the end, because like you just stay in the flow of the presentation and then take the questions at the end, and I simply forgot to say that. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. No, just another question. So sometimes in the pull request, there are reviewers who think that they are better developers, that they know everything better. They say, do this, do that. So it is something like communication problem.
Yes.
What is your suggestion in this situation?
Send them this presentation. No, seriously, like the part about the pull request being reviewer, maybe the slide about not being a jerk, like it's a problem, right? Like you have, it's something to deal with, but it's not problem with the pull request author, is the problem with the reviewer, and that has to be handled by the manager or.
Last question?
Yeah, I once had a project where it was a disadvantage to communicate in the open because the organization was in a bad financial situation, and there was this project which was maybe the hope to get something positive, but having it in the open meant that all the others who got the budget cut were unhappy to see something that was unnecessary in their point of view. So it would have been better to keep this in the secret until it was really active.
It
Thank
could, yeah, if you ask about my take on this, I would say that it could be mitigated by keeping it private, but I think that the core of the issue was that it was not explained well why we are doing that. Like, it's something that probably the upper leadership didn't communicate well, because if the project was happening, I wouldn't hide that project is happening. I would try to make sure that everyone understands why it is happening. Okay, if it cannot be explained, then sure, go private, but then it's an exception, and it's fine. There will be a lot of, maybe that's important thing to add, there will be a lot of topics that cannot be communicated in the open. So there are some things that are just personal, there are some things that are like security related and stuff like that, so those don't happen in the open. But the usual feature development, most of the time, is okay. Thank you. I can take more questions outside. Like, I will be there. Yeah, I will do that. I will be there, so feel free to come and ask. Thanks a lot.